It wasn't unusual, and this is no lie, it wasn't unusual for me to go to work on a Friday at 1 o'clock and take a sleeping bag with me and come home on Monday at 1 o'clock.
The grit, the determination, the hard work just to keep it afloat.
And then they've took it to another level of professionalism that probably I wouldn't have been able to do.
You have empathy for both sides and reason.
Other drivers can see the commitment you're putting in, and you do know and you do value what they're going through, and we work hard. It's as simple as that.
Welcome back to the Driven Podcast. Today we're going to be talking with the founder of Alpha, my dad, and we're going to be discussing how Alpha started. Back to the beginning, how did Alpha actually start?
Started back in 1983 when I was looking for a summer job. And what happened was I got a half jockey basically on a settle car. So basically I had half a rental for a week, and we went from there. So eventually I bought my own car, and then I bought shares in the business, and then eventually overtook the business and bought the other partners out of the business.
So did it literally start with one car or two cars? How many cars was it from the beginning, and what was a little trajectory like in the growth?
So when I bought into the firm and started with the firm, shortly before that it was 11 cars, I believe. And then it went up, we sort of got up to about 20 cars. I stayed there for a while, then we moved it up. Within a year or so, we were like 25, 30 cars. But again, it was obviously very small, and you had to drive yourself and work yourself. It wasn't even paying its bills, to be honest with you. I was keeping it afloat by working on a Friday, Saturday night, different times, keeping the wage bill down, and then working hard throughout the week. I mean, it wasn't unusual, and this is no lie, it wasn't unusual for me to go to work on a Friday at 1 o'clock and take a sleeping bag with me and come home on Monday at 1 o'clock in the day, just because there was just no time to go home and sleep. It was just literally like we wanted to really hit the weekend, and that's what we done, and that's how we got ahead of the other firms.
So that's probably a bit of a lesson in life, that nothing's worth it without putting the hard work, and you don't get anywhere. But listening to that, in terms of comparison to the competition, I don't think a lot of people do that. So obviously the grit, the determination, the hard work just to keep it afloat has paid dividends over time. What else would you say set us apart from the competition at the time?
Well, I think it is, people realise that you're in it and you mean it, and you're working hard. And as I say, I come from a driving background, and then other drivers can see the commitment you're putting in, and you do know and you do value what they're going through. Obviously, you're doing operating, you're seeing the staff there, and they can see you're working hard too, and they buy into that. So from an early age, we got a good staff, and we got some good loyal drivers who stuck with us through thick and thin. And then we just grew it, and it wasn't unusual. We had night men, day men, and the day men wouldn't go home till the night men come out, and vice versa. So we had a good coverage, and they used to value the customers. We'd make sure that the early bookings were done. So sometimes the night guy was going home and say, "Oh, I'll stay out an hour and do, Mr. Smith or whatever, and take him to work," because they didn't want that customer to be late to work, and that's how we grew the early morning work.
I suppose when you think about it, if you have only a handful of drivers who'd work the night, maybe one or two, if one of them went home, you're in trouble really in terms of coverage. So obviously I think listening to you there, it's like you'd have to ask people, or people that do it, they had a conscience, the drivers for the customers. Obviously I'm not saying drivers don't now, because they do. It's just a different problem. We've got the scale now where we can cover bookings easier because we've got a lot more drivers. But back then, obviously,
I think obviously, what's happened is we've always been close to what the drivers needed, because I've been a driver, and yous have come into the business, the three lads, and they've watched it from an early age, from when you've been 15, 14, 15, whatever, working in the office, and you get the vibe and the importance of keeping the drivers happy, keeping the customers happy, and the balance between the two. It's not always the driver's right or the customer's right. There's always this thing of making ends meet in the middle, and from that we've always been a success, because we see both sides, and we've been fair, and we work hard. It's as simple as that.
I suppose that we're stuck in the middle, piecing together both sides, and we we do have empathy for both sides and reasoning, and I think sometimes people don't understand that. They think we're favouring one side or the other. Driver might say, oh, it's the customer might say it's the driver, but obviously 99.99% of the time everything's handled fine. Just that we're always in the middle trying to piece it together. And again, in other, last week's episode and stuff that we spoke about was actually balancing the efficiency for the driver against the waiting time for the customer as well. So, we want everybody happy. If the driver makes more money, fantastic, make as much money as possible, they'll keep working for us. If the customer is delayed, obviously that's a problem. We want to keep their waiting times to a bare minimum, as much as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we, as you know, Jay, we do a lot of work on this, and we watch, and the present system with zones and whatever. We work hard at keeping them small enough so the drivers are incentivized to run for jobs. Even if they're not going that far, so we keep the zones tight because we don't want the drivers, what they call in the old days, they hate crossing cars and whatever. We certainly don't want that. We want basically the driver to come out and earn as much money as he can in as short a space of time. We understand it can be a frustrating job, but it'll also be a very rewarding job. And obviously we need the customers week in, week out to keep coming back to us. And that's how we do it. We make the drivers, or we believe we make the drivers the most money we possibly can, and they keep the customers happy because they're happy to be here.
What problems did you notice in the industry at the time?
There's a whole host of problems, mainly that it was a rough industry. A lot of people didn't like the industry, although they'd relied upon it. Even the customers, I don't think, liked the industry. We had to do a massive amount of work on, professionalising it, and when we went to work on it, we had to do it full time. There's a lot of people taking money out of it at the time, and they never really contributed anything to it, like a lifestyle business style. I come into it and I started to buy these small businesses up and trying to make alpha as it became, much more efficient than the others.
So was the growth aspirations at the time, or is that something that you may be limited by the tech, or could you still do that at the time?
No, we always wanted to grow, but within the limitations of the tech. So back in the day when I started, like a firm of 100 cars was absolutely ridiculously big. We were talking about cars, like most firms were 25, 20 cars, a big firm was 50. So as the technology grew, obviously the aspirations grew, but the willingness and the desire to grow has always been there.
Obviously you didn't have the technology we have now, so how did you used to distribute the jobs?
Well, we used to have pen and paper, and then I come up with a system of areas. So we'd pay a printer to a big piece of paper, and we'd have different areas, so the operator would be able to call out these areas, which did increase the work at the time. But obviously it was no match for the data heads that came, and then subsequently the mobile phones.
And obviously things I remember as a kid being around it, obviously being in the office, and it was the dispatching by the voice, anyone the ASDA, all that. So obviously you'd have to ask drivers where they were, they'd feed back the positions and distribute the work. It was that tough.
Oh, that was horrendous. I ended up working for years on a Friday, Saturday night, when really I wanted to drive myself because there was more money in driving. But for the sake of the business, I had to do the set and do the, as you say, do call. It was almost like a racing commentator. Anybody here, anybody there. But the drivers would tell me the difference between having a good operator on a Friday, Saturday night, it'd be like 34% in their wages. So it was when a lot of work was done. So we had to make sure we got that right. And to be honest with you, I ended up doing a lot of it myself in the early days. We then got other great, members of staff. One of them was downstairs. Now Mick O'Leary was a fantastic operator. But as time moved on, obviously we all couldn't keep up. The voice was just old technology, and we went to data heads, and then we took another leap forward.
I used to remember Bobby's distinct voice on the set when you'd have it on in the car.
But there's another guy, Bobby Bledo, who's another legend. I mean, he was a fantastic operator. There was a number of them, and that's where the firm started. obviously once the technology come in and it just grew further and further and further, and that was when, we had to reinvest at every point.
One thing I also remember, if you can allude to, is obviously we used to do it all the marketing then was all leafleting, and you'd be going round putting stickers through people's doors, that they have frequently used numbers on, could be hospitals, dentists, whatever in the local area. Obviously, I remember that there was a massive range of phone numbers, and obviously that was because the technology then was like the analog line, so you get a busy tone if one line was busy. So how was that? Did you have to have loads of phones and man that, or did they all come through to one phone still?
In the early days, yeah, we used to have like about 12 phones on the table. Obviously, then we got a switchboard and all the telephones would come through, but you had to pay. So 8797 would have 8 lines coming through to it, and as time went on, 722, all the 8s would have God knows how many lines through it, but a lot. The telephone switch is probably a forgotten part of the technology, but that brought things on as well.
But I just even remember the amount of lines you'd have, like in Aylwood, you'd have 486879745613033336. There's more, because obviously in the early days, it's like when we do an acquisition now, every traditional taxi firm has about 50 lines, and that's all born from the old days where you'd have to ring or know different lines when you got an engaged son, so the customer would probably memorise 10 different numbers for Alpha, because if one, you'd ring the other. Yeah. Obviously, as you say, as the technology moved on, it become, ISDN then, which is like multiple lines within the analog system, and now it's obviously purely SIP-based, which is virtual.
Yeah, you couldn't, there was different areas, so people from Hale Wood thought that 486, prefix on the telephone was their number. People from Speak would be 425 or Garston would be 427. So you couldn't get them lines through to your office in Hale Wood. You had to have an office in Garston to send the 427 number to, for instance. So it was a really, that was a tough part actually. In part of like when we expanded, and in fact, just to keep still at one time, we had a real problem when we were getting the office was getting bought, compulsory purchase to build houses.
And Higher Road, that one. Yeah.
On Higher Road, yeah. And we had to get a place in Hale Wood somewhere, because 90% of our business was on 486 exchange. And it was a really, really stressful time in getting a shop in Hale Wood. And in the end, we bought the place on Mackett's Lane, an old cycle shop, which got us out of a hole. But it was a really worrying time that because we would have had to pay for every phone call, because we had to have had the 448 exchange and re-divert them numbers through. And you'd have to pay for every single phone call, which it wouldn't have been viable. So it was a really, it was a big problem at the time. We don't think of things like that now, but at the time it was a big thing.
So in a nutshell, we had to stay within the 486 exchange, move literally 100 metres down the road, because obviously the premises that we were renting was compulsory purchase, but obviously then you've got the problem is you need to stay in the exchange, and if nothing's available, the business is gone, or may as well be, because if you're paying for every phone call just to answer it, back then it'd be an extortionate, the volume that goes through.
Yeah, even then, it was really difficult to get a place. It went everywhere, and nowhere was. And again, taxi businesses weren't popular. You needed 24/7 access and planning permission, etc. There was problems all over the place. It was a really worrying time, but in the end, we managed to get the place on Mackett's Lane and get planning permission for it within the time, and as I say, it was a stressful time.
What do you think the main advantages are of it being a family business?
I think the main advantages are the passion and the drive to get things right. I think obviously from an early age, the lads have come in the business and they've grown with the business and the technology and all the things really that I'm not particularly good at. They've took to another level. Obviously the technology being one of the main points. But I like to think that I've grown the business, and the values of the driver and the customers and the staff have instilled in the boys, and then they've took it to another level of professionalism that probably I wouldn't have been able to do on my own. both in terms of, complaint handling and technology and operations, obviously. So all them things combined, I think that the lads do a brilliant job, and a better job, really, if I'm honest, than I could do.
Key point to add to that, obviously, with the family values, I think, instilled in the business, my take on it is we've had lots of staff that have been here years and years and years, as long as me. Some of the call centres alluded to before, Mick, longer than probably I've been alive. So when you think about it, I think these family values have been instilled in the business, but that loyalty, passion, a lot of our senior staff that have been there that long, I think have had those values shared, and they may as well have the same surname in some ways because they have that passion and value for the business. And I think that's what helps us drive us forward in all areas, is a lot of people that are in the business care about the business.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that, especially the lads, the senior management especially, we do see them as, as an extended part of the family. And, I think I've mentioned it before, I've seen our managers go at each other over the table over 30, 40 jobs. I go into other businesses, I don't see that passion. I do not see the level of commitment in their senior staff than I've got here with mine.
Looking back from the early days to now, what do you think were some of our key milestones?
There's been a good few, but one of them was when we moved the Knowsley firm into Liverpool. As the firm started in Halewood, which was Knowsley, was the bigger firm. But at the time, Liverpool were trying to grow the taxi businesses, the local council, and it was very, very difficult in Knowsley to get anyone past the badge at that time. So we decided that we were going to pay for all the Knowsley drivers to move to Liverpool. And it was a big, substantial, cost at the time. It was a big investment. And the reason we done it was we wanted to get the efficiencies of having one major big firm rather than having two firms that couldn't. The rules stated that they couldn't pass work to each other, which sounds silly now, but in the day that was what was happening. So we basically paid for all the Knowsley drivers to be moved over to Liverpool, and we had this one big firm, and overnight we were over 300 cars. I think it was 330 cars from two separate firms, and then we really went to town, and that was a big moment.
So looking at that, obviously that's changed because now there's deregulation. You can, and as we've explained on a previous episode, discussed that you can, obviously, as long as you've got a license in that, you can work wherever. Back then, obviously you couldn't. So you had to invest, pay for the transfer of plates, which sounds silly, as you say, just to be able to dispatch work to drivers who live local to cover the local work. But obviously, if that was the loophole at the time, but I do remember that, and I remember it being a big task and undertaking. But then, because at the time I was doing shifts or whatever, I was around the office, I remember it being just a lot more efficient because obviously your driver pot is so much bigger.
It was ridiculous at the time. You get a job over from Liverpool and there's a Knowsley car right outside, you couldn't give it to him. So we moved on from that, and once we got that 330 cars, it started to move up very quickly, and we realised that we had made the right decision. It wasn't as clear when we first done it, because when we first bought the Liverpool firm, it didn't go very well at all. It was sort of up and down, mostly down. And then we bought another little Liverpool firm, and then we got it stable, and then we made the move with Knowsley, and then it took off like nobody's business.
And another key milestone I remember is obviously when we broke into the students. I remember a lot of work from the Smithdown area, the Brookhouse pub, all the housing around that area, but back in the day. And obviously that gave us a profile because we had drivers going into the city centre, and back in the day even more so, people had to come back to where your honeypot of work was. That sort of enabled us to get drivers work on the arterial route home.
Yeah, 100%. That was a big, and what we done once we got into the student market, we were able to buy up some of the small little firms around that area, which made it even better. So the students were sort of getting a much better service from us than, than from the other firms. So we sort of, in a way, cornered the student market for a good long while. We still got a lot of students now.
Do you think that enabled us to break into the city centre?
Oh, 1,000%, because it was all nighttime economy. Liverpool, again, got it right. In my opinion, the nighttime economy is brilliant, and you don't really see it. I've got a lot of friends in other areas, in other cities, and their nighttime economy is nothing like Liverpool's. So we bought into that, and we got a lot of people out there. I know a lot of drivers who were making a living in Liverpool city centre and the surrounding areas. So that grew the firm too. And obviously the students got us into the city centre, and then we moved on in the city centre, and we're available to everybody.
I remember that, and then what gave us further growth in the city centre, obviously we don't have it now, was the Duke Street office in the city centre.
Yeah, the Duke Street office was a great success, and people were surprised we closed it. The only reason we closed it was we were getting a lot of the work on the app. Technology had moved on, so people were using the IVR or mainly the app of a night, and so it got us down there, got us a critical mass, and then the app took over basically.
So obviously back in the day we started in Halewood, and we've alluded to that we grew and we bought other firms, and we Chilwell and other acquisitions. But right now we're obviously the largest operator in the Northwest. How did you find, and what was the ambition to get to where it is today, with obviously our 7 offices all in, across the Northwest region?
So we've always had the ambition and reinvestment. There's never been a problem in us reinvesting into the business. We've always done that. And that obviously brings opportunities. We've moved out, as you know, we're up in Southport, we're down in Halton, in Widnes, and we're all over Liverpool, Knowsley, Sefton, and the Whittle. So basically, we want to, number one, we want to consolidate what we've got. There's areas of growth within there that we've marked and that we'll move on to. Outside of that, we can become a regional power. There's other places rather outside Liverpool, Merseyside, that we've got our eye on. But initially, there's still a lot of work to do locally in Merseyside. So I've talked about a lot of the history of Alpha. What, in your opinion, is the future?
Well, I think, as you spoke about before, we've still got a lot of work to do in consolidating the Northwest region. There's still target areas there. There's still areas just outside of that. However, we're totally confident as a business, aren't we, that we could create a national solution in the mid to long term. How that's going to pan out, we yet to totally see, but I totally have the confidence, and we've got the team, we've got the personnel, obviously, we've got we constantly reinvest, we work hard, and I think that goes on to say, basically, from what should never change from what we've always had is that reinvestment, the passion, the grit, and I don't think anyone's ever going to take that away from us, and I'd put us up against any other taxi business. I'd say we're the best, and I totally believe that because of our growth trajectory and our modern way of thinking. We've embraced all angles. We've grown with technology. We've adapted with to the modern ways, and we'll continue to do so. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit subscribe, and we'll be back again next week with another video.